When a struggling young woman walked into the wrong blind date, she had no idea she was about to meet a mysterious millionaire who would make her feel like she had never done before. What started as a mix-up turned into an undeniable connection that neither of them could ignore. But with their worlds so far apart, can love truly conquer all? Stick around to find out. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that prove fate works in mysterious ways. Lily stood in front of her small apartment, trying to adjust the neckline of her second-hand dress. She hadn't worn anything so nice in months. It was simple, dark blue with a slightly ruffled hem. But it was the best she had, and for once, she was determined to look like she belonged in a world that felt just out of reach. She glanced at the clock on her phone, 7:15 p.m. Her blind date was set for 7:30 p.m., and she was running late. Life hadn't been easy for her. A low-paying job as a barista, late nights working double shifts, and never-ending student loan payments had created a constant buzz of anxiety in the back of her mind. She lived in a cramped one-bedroom apartment that barely fit her things and had just enough room for her aspirations to fit between the cracks of her reality. But despite the constant challenges, she managed to keep her head above water. And tonight? Well, tonight was a chance for something new. Her thumb hovered over the message on her dating app. "Can't wait to meet you tonight," it said, sent by someone named Noah. She'd been talking to Noah for over a week now, and although their conversations were pleasant, caring, thoughtful, even flirtatious, she hadn't felt the kind of excitement she'd hoped for when she downloaded the app. It had started as a distraction from the daily grind, but now, as she stared at her reflection, she wondered if she was just setting herself up for disappointment. "Don't overthink it, Lily," she muttered, running her fingers through her long brown hair. Her reflection seemed almost foreign to her tonight, as though she was seeing a version of herself that had taken on a new persona for this date. She wasn't just Lily, she could be someone else tonight. At least, that's what she hoped. She double-checked the location, an upscale restaurant downtown. Expensive. The kind of place that only catered to people who could afford to drop their entire paycheck on one meal. Not the kind of place she was used to. She felt out of place even before stepping foot inside, but the idea of finally meeting Noah in person made her push past her doubts. He seemed kind, understanding, and he'd hinted at taking her to a cozy little cafe afterward. Something simple. It gave her hope that maybe, just maybe, she was wrong about these blind date apps. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Noah. "I'm here. Can't wait to meet you. Look for a tall guy in a blue suit." She took a deep breath and grabbed her purse. The nerves were building again, but she tried to ignore them. As long as Noah wasn't expecting something she couldn't give, she'd be fine. And if nothing else, it would be a fun story to tell her friends the next day. Alex confidently walked through the luxurious penthouse suite, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The sun had long set, but he hadn't even noticed the time slip away. His business meetings, calls, and endless deals had kept him in a constant state of motion. But today was different. Today, his so-called friends had managed to convince him that he needed to meet someone. "Trust me, Alex," his friend James had said earlier that week. "You've been working too hard. You need someone who can remind you what life's about." The problem wasn't that Alex didn't want love. He did, more than anything. But in his world, love was always entangled with expectations. Women gravitated toward him because of his wealth, his name, his status. No one had ever seen him. Not really. They saw the shiny exterior, the designer clothes, the luxury cars, but they never took the time to understand who he was as a person. And so, when James had set him up on this blind date, arranged through some mutual acquaintance, Alex had gone along with it, even though he had serious doubts. He wasn't sure what he was hoping for, but after years of empty, shallow relationships, he was tired of the charade. He just wanted someone who could see beyond the money and the glamour. He quickly checked his appearance in the full-length mirror in the hallway. His tailored blue suit, a gift from his father on his last birthday, fit him perfectly. The watch on his wrist was understated. No need to draw attention with gold-plated extravagance. He kept things simple, professional, and discreet. No one needed to know he was a millionaire. He just needed to find someone who could make him feel real. The restaurant was in the heart of downtown. White linens draped the tables, and the soft hum of conversations filled the air. Waiters moved swiftly, carrying plates of gourmet food, while candles flickered gently in the dim light. It was the kind of place where the well-off came to forget their stresses, where every dish was a work of art and every drink a carefully crafted masterpiece. Lily stood just outside, glancing up at the building's towering exterior, her stomach doing flips. She hadn't realized how upscale this place would be. It was intimidating, but it was also beautiful. She reminded herself that Noah was waiting inside, and maybe it wouldn't be so bad after all. At the same time, Alex arrived at the restaurant, his hands in his pockets as he walked toward the entrance. He could already feel the weight of the evening pressing on him. The small talk, the polite nods, the forced interest. It was all starting to feel suffocating. Inside, the maitre d' greeted him with a nod, leading him to his table. It was perfect. Quiet, secluded, the ideal place for a private conversation. He sat down, waiting for his date to arrive, half expecting it to be just another awkward encounter. The moment Lily stepped through the restaurant's heavy wooden door, the noise of clinking glasses and quiet murmurs hit her like a wave. She paused, her eyes scanning the room. The dim lighting made everything feel more intimate, more elegant than she was used to. She ran a hand over her hair, trying to smooth out the slight mess that the wind had caused on her way over. The dress was nice, but it still felt like it didn't quite belong in a place like this. She stood in the entrance for a moment, unsure of where to go. The restaurant seemed to stretch out before her like a maze, tables spread across the room like islands in a sea of candlelight. Couples whispered quietly to one another, and waiters glided past with plates of food, barely making a sound. Lily felt a jolt of nervousness. Her fingers danced over her phone, trying to recall the photo of Noah she had seen on the app. Tall, dark hair, the kind of guy who probably belonged here. She'd sent him a message earlier that she was running late, but the butterflies in her stomach were only getting worse. She glanced around the room again, but no one stood out. She hadn't expected to feel so lost, but she did. She was starting to doubt that this date would go as well as she'd hoped. It was then that her eyes fell upon a man seated near the far corner, who seemed completely at ease. He was looking at the menu, relaxed, like he knew exactly what he was doing. His hair was dark and neatly combed, his jawline strong but not overly sharp. The suit he wore, dark blue and perfectly tailored, looked expensive but not flashy. A subtle elegance to it that caught her attention. She swallowed and glanced away, immediately berating herself for staring. "Focus, Lily," she thought, trying to find her bearings. But then, she noticed a slight movement from the man. He stood up, and as if on cue, their eyes met across the room. She froze for a second, her heart skipping a beat. Could it be? Was that Noah? He didn't quite look like what she had expected. His style was more sophisticated, his presence more commanding. Maybe she was just overthinking things. Before she could decide whether to walk over or keep searching, the man started walking toward her. His expression was confident, almost amused, and his steps were purposeful, like he knew exactly where he was going. Alex had been sitting at his table, going over the evening in his mind. This wasn't exactly how he had pictured his night going. "Is this going to be worth it?" he muttered to himself. He had been dragged out by James and the others for a chance at true love. But as soon as the door opened and the faint sound of Lily's heels clicked on the floor, Alex's attention snapped to her. She stood at the entrance, looking around with a mixture of curiosity and nervousness, clearly unsure of who to approach. Her eyes darted across the room, searching. For a second, Alex thought he saw the hesitation in her step. He didn't want her to feel uncomfortable, especially in a place like this. He stood up without thinking. She looked over, and their gazes locked. For a moment, he felt something unexpected, not the usual power or control that he was used to having in social settings, but a pull, something genuine that made him take a step forward. He adjusted his tie, then straightened his shoulders, his instincts kicking in. He had been sitting there long enough, and he was used to making the first move. She must be looking for me, he thought, and moved toward her with purpose. "Are you meant to be on a blind date?" he asked smoothly, his voice deep but warm, hoping to make a good first impression. Lily blinked in surprise, a mixture of confusion and curiosity flickering across her face. Her eyebrows furrowed, then she gave a small, nervous smile, trying to act like she wasn't caught off guard. "This is him, right?" "Yes, I'm Lily," she replied, her voice softer than usual as if she wasn't entirely sure of the situation. Lily hesitated for a moment. This wasn't at all what she had imagined. She'd pictured someone younger, a little less polished. But Alex seemed put together in a way that almost startled her. The way he spoke, the confidence in his posture. It was as if he belonged here, in a way she didn't. He was all sharp angles, well-cut fabric, and that elusive aura of someone who was used to getting what he wanted. "Well, sure," Lily said, smiling nervously, trying to mask her confusion. She took a step toward him, still unsure but feeling the strangest pull. She hadn't expected someone like him, so poised, so composed, but here he was, standing before her with a casual yet assured demeanor. He didn't look anything like the man she had been talking to online, but she couldn't deny there was something about him. His presence, his calmness, it was almost magnetic. They sat down at Alex's table. The air between them was thick with the weight of the misunderstanding, but they both tried to ignore it. The awkwardness felt almost natural as they exchanged polite smiles. Alex gestured for her to sit. As she lowered herself into the seat, she tried to ease her nerves by fiddling with her purse, avoiding eye contact at first. "So, what are you drinking?" Alex asked, his voice warm and engaging as he signaled for the waiter. Lily bit her lip for a moment, then shrugged. "A glass of red wine, I guess. If you don't mind?" "Of course not," he said, turning to the waiter who had appeared beside them. "2 glasses of the house red." As the waiter departed, the silence between them grew more uncomfortable. Lily wasn't sure what to say next. She couldn't help but notice how Alex's clothes seemed so effortlessly expensive. The slight gleam of his cufflinks, the subtle way he carried himself, the quiet confidence in his eyes, all of it screamed money, but not in an overbearing way. It was understated and deliberate. "So, what's your story?" Lily asked, leaning back slightly in her chair, trying to fill the silence. "Do you always go on blind dates?" Alex chuckled softly, shaking his head. "No, my friends think I need someone to, settle down with, but I'm not sure that's exactly what I'm looking for." He paused, studying her. "What about you? What are you looking for from this date?" Lily couldn't help but feel slightly uncomfortable. It wasn't that she disliked talking about herself, but she had this feeling that Alex would see her as less than he expected. He looked like the kind of man who didn't need to explain himself. His life was wrapped up in the kind of confidence that only wealth could give you. "I just wanted to live a little," she said, hoping the simplicity of it sounded casual. "I didn't expect it to be so fancy. I'm just a regular girl, you know." Alex raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "A regular girl?" He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. "You don't seem so regular to me. You've got an energy about you." Lily shifted in her seat, suddenly feeling like she was under a magnifying glass. His tone was gentle, but there was something almost too observant about it. She smiled awkwardly, trying to brush it off. "Maybe I'm just good at pretending." There was a brief silence before Alex's lips curved into a little smile. "We all pretend a little, don't we?" The words hung in the air between them, and Lily couldn't shake how excited she felt. The soft clinking of glass against glass filled the air as the waiter returned with their drinks. Alex took a sip of his wine, savoring the rich taste as he looked across the table at Lily, who was fiddling nervously with her napkin. The quiet between them, at first so thick with uncertainty, had begun to dissipate. Their earlier awkwardness seemed to have dissolved, and though neither of them had walked in without any concrete expectation, there was an undeniable spark growing between them. Lily stole a glance at Alex, noticing for the first time how approachable he seemed. His earlier cool demeanor had softened, and he was leaning forward slightly, listening intently, like he truly cared about what she was saying. She couldn't remember the last time she had someone give her that much attention. "So," she said, breaking the silence as she took a sip of her own wine, "I'm sure a guy like you could get anyone you wanted. So why did you agree to this blind date without any idea of what I looked like?" Alex chuckled, shaking his head as though he couldn't believe the question. I guess it's just one of those things where you get pushed into it by people who think they know what's best for you. He gave a half-hearted shrug. I've got a few friends who think I need someone to settle down with. He used air quotes around settle down, his tone making it clear that he didn't take the idea very seriously. Lily raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Settle down? You? You don't seem like the settling type. A small, almost sad smile tugged at the corners of Alex's mouth. I don't know. I've spent so much time building this life, business, success, everything you'd expect from a guy like me, that I don't know if I've left room for anything else. His gaze softened as he took another sip of his drink. I've realized that people are more interested in what I have than who I am. Lily's heart went out to him. That sucks. People should see you for more than your money. Alex let out a breath, as if the weight of his words had finally been released. It's funny, he continued. I used to think that being successful would bring me happiness, but now I'm starting to wonder if maybe it's just keeping me from connecting with people. There was a long pause between them, and Lily couldn't help but feel for him. She could see that the life he had built wasn't making him happy, and that realization seemed to weigh heavier on him than any deal or business transaction ever could. She suddenly felt a strange, comforting connection to him, a feeling that went deeper than surface-level attraction. She took a deep breath, deciding to share a bit of herself. I know what you mean, she said softly. I don't have nearly the kind of life you have, but I get what it feels like to feel disconnected. My whole life is just a constant struggle to keep moving forward. Alex studied her, his gaze intense yet understanding. I never would have guessed. You don't come across as someone that's struggling. Lily smiled, feeling a little shy. I've gotten good at pretending, she shrugged. But it's not easy, especially when you're trying to hold on to something bigger than what you've got. Alex nodded. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? You get so caught up in what other people think you should be, and it's hard to figure out what you really want. Lily laughed lightly. Tell me about it. I've spent the last couple of years trying to figure out if I should even bother dreaming anymore. I mean, how can you dream when everything around you is telling you to just survive? They locked eyes for a moment, and Alex's expression softened. He could see the quiet strength in Lily, even through her struggles. She didn't give up, didn't let life break her, and he admired that more than anything. It was something so rare to find. Their conversation continued to flow more naturally now, with each of them peeling back the layers of their lives and revealing things they hadn't shared with anyone else in a long time. I've always wanted to travel, Lily admitted, leaning back in her chair slightly. Not just go on vacation, but really see the world. I want to go to places where people aren't living the same way I am, see a different life, a different perspective. But she trailed off, biting her lip. I don't know if I'll ever get the chance. Alex could hear the underlying frustration in her voice, and it made his chest tighten. I get it. I do, he said quietly. I've been to places that most people only dream of, but it doesn't feel real when you're there alone. It's all just a blur of expensive hotels and meetings. I think I've been running away from something, but I don't know what that something is. Lily smiled sympathetically, her gaze softening. Maybe what you're running away from is what you really need to face, she said, her voice filled with a quiet wisdom that surprised Alex. Alex laughed lightly. Wow, I didn't expect you to be so insightful. Here I was thinking this was going to be a terrible evening. Lily grinned, her nerves easing as the conversation turned lighter. I'm a lot more than I seem. You'd be surprised. The more they talked, the more Alex found himself drawn to Lily, not just for her beauty, but for her honesty. She didn't pretend to be someone she wasn't. She didn't try to impress him. She was simply herself. And for the first time in a long time, Alex felt seen. Not for his money or his status, but for who he truly was underneath it all. Their conversation flowed effortlessly after that, covering everything from childhood memories to random facts about their favorite foods. There was something about the way they interacted, an ease, a familiarity that felt so right, despite the odd circumstances that had brought them together. They even found themselves comparing their favorite books, And when Alex mentioned The Great Gatsby, Lily couldn't help but laugh. I love that book. It's like reading about all the things I don't want. Alex raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Really? I thought everyone loved Gatsby. I think it's a cautionary tale, she replied, her eyes lighting up with passion. People chase after the wrong things, thinking it'll bring them happiness. But in the end, they're left with nothing but regret. Alex sat back, taking in her words. Maybe you're right. It's funny how we both think we know what we want, but sometimes what we want isn't really what we need. Lily smiled, feeling the weight of the moment settle between them. Maybe what we really need is someone who understands us, she said quietly. For a split second, the world seemed to pause. Alex felt his heart beat a little faster, his pulse quickening. There was something undeniable between them, a connection that felt deeper than just two people on a blind date. It was something raw, real, and maybe, just maybe, something they both needed more than they had realized. As the evening wore on, they continued to talk, laugh, and share moments of genuine understanding. The world outside the restaurant seemed to fade away. For the first time in a long time, both Lily and Alex felt like they weren't just existing. They were truly living in this moment. And for them, that was everything. The soft hum of background chatter and clinking silverware filled the air as Lily and Alex continued to talk, the connection between them growing stronger with every word exchanged. Lily and Alex were completely lost with each other. That is, until the maitre d' approached their table with a polite cough, a clipboard in hand. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, smiling professionally but with a hint of hesitation in his voice. "There is a lady named Lucy looking for an Alex and a gentleman named Noah looking for a Lily. They're both at separate tables." The words hung in the air for a moment, like a veil had been lifted, revealing the truth they both had been oblivious to. Lily froze. Her heart skipped a beat, her stomach twisting in sudden anxiety. She looked at Alex, who had gone pale, his eyes widening in confusion. I'm Lily," she said, her voice coming out much smaller than usual. She could feel her cheeks burn with embarrassment, the weight of the situation suddenly hitting her. "And I'm Alex," Alex said slowly, his brows furrowing as he processed the words. "Wait, you mean—" He trailed off, glancing around the room, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Lily's face went bright red, and she quickly stood up, almost knocking over her glass of wine in the process. "Oh my God, this is all wrong," she muttered, her voice barely audible. The realization hit both of them like a cold splash of water. They weren't on the right blind date. They'd been talking to the wrong person this whole time. Lily glanced down at the table, unable to meet Alex's eyes. Her pulse was racing, and her mind was spinning. She had spent the last 30 minutes, maybe more, opening up to someone she wasn't even supposed to be with. The laughter, the shared moments, it all felt like a dream now, one that was shattering around her. Alex leaned back in his chair, his fingers running through his hair in confusion. "So, you're not here for me?" he asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and frustration. Lily quickly shook her head, her stomach in knots. "No, I mean, yes, but I was supposed to be meeting someone else. Someone named, She glanced at the maitre d', who was still standing by awkwardly. "Noah?" The maitre d' nodded politely. "Yes, Ms. Lily. Noah is waiting for you at another table. I apologize for the confusion." Lily turned back to Alex, feeling a strange sense of embarrassment creep up her spine. "And you were supposed to meet someone named Lucia," she added, realizing it almost too late. "I'm so sorry. This is insane." Alex let out a dry laugh, but there was no humor in it. "This is definitely not how I imagined tonight going," he said, still processing the shock of it all. I thought you were the one I was supposed to meet." There was a long pause, a heavy silence hanging in the air between them. Lily felt like she had to fill the gap with something, anything, to ease the tension. She forced a laugh, her voice shaky. "I guess I should have known something was off. You're way too good-looking to be my blind date." Alex looked at her, an eyebrow quirked as if he was unsure if she was joking. "What? Because you expected someone who doesn't look like they've seen a day of sunshine? Lily rolled her eyes, trying to push the awkwardness down. I don't know, I just expected someone less polished. She gestured toward his sharp suit and expensive-looking shoes, and someone who wouldn't know the difference between an iced coffee and a regular one. Alex chuckled, finally breaking the tension a little. Well, that's a pretty bold assumption, but hey, maybe I do know the difference. I've been to enough cafes to figure it out. Lily laughed softly, though it was strained. Her nerves were still racing. Yeah, well, I guess you're not a complete disaster, even if you're the wrong date, she said, the words coming out without thinking. Alex's eyes softened at her, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his lips. Well, considering I just found out you're not the person I thought you were, I'm glad to know I'm not a complete disaster either. He paused, his gaze steady on hers. But seriously, this is kind of insane. Lily nodded, feeling the gravity of the moment. Yeah, it's insane. I was just starting to think this date was actually going well. Alex leaned forward, his voice dropping a little lower. I thought it was going really well, too. Lily's heart fluttered at the sincerity in his tone. Despite everything that had just happened, a part of her didn't want this moment to end. There was something about Alex that made her feel seen, in a way she hadn't in a long time, but she couldn't deny the absurdity of it all. They both stood awkwardly, unsure of what to do next. The maitre d' lingered, but neither of them seemed eager to go back to their supposed real dates. There was a strange pull between them that neither could ignore. As Lily looked at Alex, she found herself wishing just for a moment that they hadn't been interrupted. She didn't want to admit it, but a small part of her was disappointed to be leaving this connection behind. So what now? She asked, her voice hesitant. Alex shrugged, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of his lips. I guess we go meet the people we're actually supposed to meet, huh? Lily nodded, feeling her heart sink just a little. Yeah, I guess. But as they made their way to their separate tables, neither of them could shake the feeling that something had been left unfinished between them. Something that neither the wrong dates nor the awkward mix-up could take away. Lily's steps felt heavier as she made her way back to the right table, her mind still reeling from the realization. She glanced at Alex once more before he turned away, their eyes locking for a brief second, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Neither of them had said it out loud, but both knew they hadn't experienced anything like that before. As Lily approached the table where Noah sat, a man in his mid-30s with an impeccable suit and a polished smile, she tried to shake off the strange weight of the evening. She forced a smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. Hey, she said, sitting down as gracefully as she could. Noah's smile didn't falter, but it was the kind of smile that said, I know what I'm doing. Lily, right? Sorry, I think I missed you when you came in. I'm Noah. She nodded, her mind still floating back to the conversation she had just left. The moment she had shared with Alex lingered in the back of her mind, like the faint echo of a song that you can't quite forget. The air between Lily and Noah was thick with polite small talk, but it felt like trying to force a smile through a fog. Every word felt rehearsed, every laugh forced. She found herself glancing around, searching for any distraction, anything to take her mind off the strange chemistry she had just experienced. Noah was talking about his latest business venture, but Lily's thoughts kept drifting back to Alex, his laugh, his insightful remarks, the way he had looked at her when they talked about their lives. It all felt so real. None of this felt real. You seem a little distracted, Lily, Noah said, interrupting her thoughts with a raised brow. Everything all right? Lily snapped back to the present, forcing a smile. Oh yeah. Sorry, just a long day. Noah chuckled. I get that. You know, I've been on some pretty hectic dates myself. It's hard to find time for anything real when you're busy with work. Lily nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She tried to focus, but every word Noah spoke seemed like background noise, a constant hum that she couldn't tune out. Every time she looked across the restaurant, she found herself glancing back at Alex's table, almost expecting to catch his gaze again. But he was busy with Lucy now, the two of them deep in conversation. Across the room, Alex was trying to pay attention to Lucy, but every word felt hollow. His thoughts, like Lily's, kept drifting back to that moment they shared, when the connection was undeniable and everything else had just fallen away. He couldn't stop thinking about how easy it had been to talk to her, how much he'd enjoyed the conversation, the laughter, the little moments of vulnerability. He glanced at Lucy, who was talking animatedly about her travels to Paris, but the words were just noise in his ears. His thoughts wandered back to Lily, to the way she had smiled when she talked about her dreams. She had been so real, so grounded. Nothing like the superficial conversation he was having now. Time seemed to slow for both of them, as they sat at their respective tables, trying to focus on the people they were supposed to be on dates with. But the connection they had shared couldn't be erased. It was a ghost, lingering in the background of every word, every smile, every awkward attempt to keep their dates going. Lily absent-mindedly stirred her drink, trying to ignore the flicker of thoughts that danced around the edges of her mind. She'd only known Alex for a short time, but it felt like she had known him for so much longer. There had been something about the way he listened, the way he spoke. No one had ever really listened to her like that before. She felt a pang of regret, but also something else, something stronger, something she couldn't quite place. At the other table, Alex was feeling much the same. He was trying to keep the conversation with Lucy going, but the words felt forced. He'd always been able to charm his way through these situations, but this time was different. His thoughts kept straying back to Lily, the way she had opened up to him without hesitation, how easy it had been to connect with her. She didn't have the polished charm of the women he was usually around, but that's what had made her so captivating. As Lucy rambled on about her latest luxury purchases, Alex's mind wandered again. What was it about Lily that made everything else feel so irrelevant? The evening stretched on, but the minutes felt like hours. Every word exchanged between Lily and Noah, every forced laugh between Alex and Lucy, felt like a part of their true selves was being withheld, a part they couldn't share because it belonged to someone else. When their meals arrived, neither of them had the appetite to eat. They barely touched their food, instead exchanging a few obligatory words about their likes and dislikes. But the unspoken connection between Lily and Alex, the one that had sparked so suddenly and intensely, hung over both their tables like a weight neither could shake. And as the evening wore on, Lily and Alex found themselves looking over at each other, just for a split second, each of them wondering what would have happened if they had just stayed with each other. The chemistry that had ignited between them hadn't gone away. It was still there, simmering beneath the surface, impossible to ignore. As Lily stepped outside into the cool evening air, she couldn't believe how her day had turned out. She could feel Alex's presence in the pit of her stomach, a pull that was too strong to ignore. As Noah walked her back to her apartment, she completely zoned out from what he was saying. Her mind couldn't stop drifting back to Alex. As she went to bed that night, she promised to try to shake it off the next morning. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains as Lily sat up in bed, her phone still clutched in her hand. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one revolving around the same person, Alex. The moment she had shared with him the night before kept replaying in her head. His easy smile, the way he'd listened to her like she mattered, how comfortable she felt around him despite the awkward situation. She hadn't felt that kind of connection in years, and now that it was over, she just couldn't shake it. Lily sat on the edge of her bed, her mind drifting back to their conversation. She remembered how Alex had seemed so different from any man she'd met before. Sure, he was rich, that was clear from his tailored suit and confident demeanor. But there was something else, something that made her feel like she wasn't just another girl on his radar. He hadn't been impressed by everything she said. He genuinely wanted to know her. She hadn't expected him to make her feel seen in a way no one else had. But why does it matter? She thought, sighing as she glanced out the window. He's probably moving on. He's probably forgotten about me already. Still, as she replayed their conversation in her head, she couldn't help but wonder what could have been if things had gone differently. What if they hadn't been interrupted? What if they had had the chance to just sit there and talk, uninterrupted, without the weight of the awkward blind dates pressing in on them? On the other side of town, Alex lay awake in his spacious penthouse, staring at the ceiling. The quiet hum of the city outside his windows did little to distract him from the thoughts that kept running through his mind. He had spent the night with Lucy, and while she was beautiful and polished, he found himself lost in the memory of Lily. He hadn't expected to be so captivated by her, by the way she had talked about her life with such raw honesty, by the way she had laughed. It was clear to him that Lily wasn't impressed by his wealth. It wasn't just her words, it was in the way she carried herself. Grounded, real. Alex rolled over in bed, grabbing his phone from the nightstand. He scrolled through his contacts, stopping at Lucy's name. The last few days had been filled with high society events, business meetings, and people who wanted to get closer to him because of his wealth. And yet, with Lucy, he felt nothing but a hollow sense of obligation. What is wrong with me? He wondered, pressing the phone to his chest. Why can't I stop thinking about her? The image of Lily's smile, the way she had looked at him so intently, kept playing in his mind. He didn't even know her last name. He hadn't gotten the chance to know her beyond those few minutes of shared conversation. But something about her felt real. He hadn't felt like that in a long time. Not since before his life had become a series of transactions, superficial meetings, and people who always had an agenda. As he sat up, he glanced at the clock. It was still early. He knew that the chances of seeing her again were slim. He didn't even know where she lived, let alone how to reach her. But a part of him wasn't ready to give up. There was something about her that felt like unfinished business. And for the first time in a long while, Alex didn't want to let something slip through his fingers. Lily forced herself to focus as she walked into the office the next day. Her coworker, Clara, waved her over, a cup of coffee in hand. "Rough night?" Clara asked with a teasing grin. Lily hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to answer. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind," she said, trying to sound casual. "Nothing too crazy." Clara raised an eyebrow. "You're the one who was practically glowing when you walked in yesterday, remember? Something good happened on that date of yours?" Lily chuckled nervously, adjusting the strap of her bag. "I don't know. I mean, it started off awkward. We had a mix-up with our dates, actually. I ended up with the wrong person, but we talked. And I don't know. There was something about him." Clara's face lit up. "Ooh, tell me more. Was he handsome? Did he treat you well?" Lily paused, her mind drifting back to Alex. "He was different. Not like anyone I've met. He actually listened. Really listened. And he was funny. But, I don't know. I don't think it's anything." Clara tilted her head, her curiosity piqued. "I think it sounds like it could be something, Lily shook her head, smiling despite herself. "Yeah, maybe. But I've already got enough on my plate. I can't be worrying about some guy who probably doesn't even remember me." Meanwhile, Alex had a meeting with his team, but his mind kept wandering back to Lily. He forced himself to focus on the discussion at hand, but every time someone said something that didn't interest him, his mind would drift back to her. Her laugh, the way she didn't seem interested in impressing him, and yet she'd impressed him more than anyone had in years. "Alex, are you listening?" his assistant asked, snapping him back to reality. "Yeah, sorry, just thinking," he muttered, rubbing his temples. "Continue." But as the meeting wore on, the thoughts of Lily began to consume him again. Why couldn't he shake it? Why did he feel this pull toward her? The connections he had with people in his world always felt transactional, as though everyone had an agenda. But with Lily, everything had felt simple, honest. His phone buzzed on the table, and he glanced at it, seeing a message from Lucy, asking if they could reschedule their dinner plans for the evening. He stared at the screen for a moment, his finger hovering over the keyboard. But then, with a sigh, he put the phone back down. "It's not worth it," he thought. "She's not the one, not when I keep thinking about her." The day wore on for both of them, and the tension they felt, this invisible pull toward each other, remained constant. Every conversation, every interaction, felt like it was happening through a filter, the reality of their respective situations muted by the lingering thoughts of someone they could have never anticipated. It was clear now, no matter how much they tried to focus, neither of them could stop thinking about the one person they hadn't planned on meeting. The connection they shared was undeniable. They just hadn't figured out yet what it meant or what they were going to do about it. The buzz of the cafe was a familiar sound to Lily as she sipped her coffee. It had been a long week. Work had been overwhelming, and her personal life had felt like a series of disconnected moments that didn't quite add up. Yet, despite all that, her mind still kept drifting back to that one night, the night with Alex. She wasn't sure what it was about him that had left such a lasting impression. Maybe it was his confidence, the way he carried himself like he had the world in his pocket, yet still showed a vulnerable side when they talked about their lives. Maybe it was the way they had connected so easily, as if they had known each other for years. Or maybe it was the fact that she'd never really met anyone like him before. Lily stirred her coffee absently, lost in thought, when the bell above the cafe door chimed. Her head jerked up almost instinctively, and her breath caught in her throat when she saw him. Alex. He was standing just inside the door, looking slightly out of place in the cozy, casual setting of the cafe. His dark, tailored jacket seemed like it belonged in a boardroom, and the way he scanned the room with sharp eyes made it clear he didn't usually frequent places like this. His gaze shifted around until it landed on her, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then, as if drawn by an invisible force, Alex walked toward her, his expression both surprised and intrigued. The moment their eyes met, the air between them seemed to crackle, as if everything that had been left unsaid was suddenly rushing to the surface. "Lily," he said, his voice low but familiar. There was a hint of disbelief in his tone, as if he wasn't sure he could trust his own eyes. Lily blinked, her heart pounding. "Alex? What are you—" "I don't know," he interrupted with a half-smile. "I went back to the restaurant and tried to track you down. I didn't know if I'll succeed. Can I join you?" Lily looked around the cafe, the thought of his presence making her both nervous and anxious. She hadn't expected to see him again, but the truth was, she had been secretly hoping for this exact kind of moment. "Sure," she replied, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "I mean, if you're not in a rush." Alex pulled out the chair with a smooth motion, sitting down across from her, his gaze never leaving hers. For a moment, they just looked at each other in silence, the hum of the cafe providing the only background noise. "Well," Alex said finally, breaking the silence, "I've been thinking about you since that night." Lily raised an eyebrow, trying to mask the surprise that bubbled up inside her. "Same here," she said quietly. "I've been thinking about you too, but I didn't know if— well, I didn't think you'd be, interested in seeing me again." Alex chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Why wouldn't I be?" Lily hesitated, unsure of how to respond. She had never expected a man like Alex to be interested in someone like her, someone who didn't fit the mold of the high society women he was probably used to. But sitting across from him now, it felt different. They weren't pretending to be anything they weren't. After a moment's pause, Alex leaned in slightly, as though the weight of everything that had been left unsaid needed to be expressed. "You know," he began, "the other night, I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, about how we're all just going through life, trying to make it through each day. I don't know why it stuck with me, but it did. I've been to so many parties, met so many people, but I don't think I've ever met anyone like you before." Lily felt her chest tighten as she listened to him speak. There was something so raw, so honest about his words, and she couldn't help but respond in kind. "I think I've been thinking about that night too," she said softly. "I never expected to connect with someone the way I did with you. But then again, maybe I should have known. You didn't act like the others. You didn't seem like you were trying to impress me, or like you were playing some game." Alex's eyes softened as he met her gaze. "I wasn't. I was just being myself. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to be anything I wasn't. With you, I could just be me." Lily's heart skipped a beat as she listened to him speak. It was everything she had felt too. She had been nervous, unsure, and yet there was something about the way he had made her feel that was unlike anything she'd ever known. She wasn't a wealthy woman. She didn't have the luxurious lifestyle that came with people like Alex. But he had seen her. He had understood her. That was something no amount of money could buy. "I feel the same way," she whispered, not even realizing she had said it out loud. You made me feel like I mattered." There was a brief silence as the weight of their words settled between them. Neither of them knew what was going to happen next, but the unspoken understanding that passed between them made everything else seem irrelevant. They didn't need to pretend. They didn't need to be anything other than what they were in that moment. Finally, Alex reached across the table, his hand resting gently on hers. His touch sent a ripple of warmth through her, and she looked up to meet his eyes. "I don't know where this is going, but I don't want to walk away without getting to know you better," Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to spend more time with you, Lily. Not because of who I am, but because of who you are." Lily's breath caught in her throat as the full weight of his words sank in. The tension between them, the connection they had shared, it was all leading up to this moment. She felt something stir inside her, a warmth, a hope, a possibility she hadn't dared to entertain before. "I'd like that," she replied softly, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I'd really like that." As the conversation continued, the barriers they had once held up seemed to melt away. They laughed freely, talked openly, and discovered more about each other with each passing moment. And in the middle of that conversation, as Alex looked at her, really looked at her, he realized something he hadn't expected. He was falling in love with her. It wasn't a sudden realization, but a quiet, steady feeling that had been growing inside him since that first moment they had met. Lily was different. She had shown him a world he had forgotten existed, a world of raw honesty, of simple joys, of being present in the moment. She had made him feel alive in a way that no amount of wealth or status had ever been able to do. For Lily, the feeling was just as strong. She had never imagined herself with someone like Alex, but now that she was sitting across from him, laughing, connecting, it felt right. She realized that the connection they had shared wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was real, and it was something worth holding on to. As the afternoon began to fade into the evening, Alex and Lily reluctantly stood up from their seats. The cafe had emptied a little, and the hum of conversation had quieted to a comfortable murmur. It had been hours, yet neither of them had wanted the conversation to end. Time had slipped away, leaving behind the undeniable feeling that something had shifted between them. Alex stood first, his movements smooth and confident, yet there was something different in the way he approached her now. A tenderness in the way he reached for his coat, and then paused, looking at her with an intensity that made Lily's heart flutter. She stood as well, her hands slightly trembling, not from nervousness, but from the weight of everything that had been said, everything that had been shared. "You know," Alex began, his voice quieter now, "I'm not sure what this is yet, but I feel like I've known you forever." Lily's chest tightened as she met his gaze. "I know what you mean," she whispered. "It feels like something different, but I don't know where it's going either." Alex stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. There was something raw and honest in his gaze, something that felt almost like a promise. "I don't know either," he said softly, "but I want to find out. I want to see where this goes. I want to be with you." Lily's breath caught, the words hanging in the air like a beautiful melody that they both understood. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or how the world would react to them being together, especially with their vastly different worlds. But there was something about Alex, something that made her believe in the possibility of a future with him, even if it wasn't going to be easy. "I want that too," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "But I think we'll have to take it one step at a time, right?" Alex smiled, a smile that reached his eyes, filling his whole face with warmth. "One step at a time," he agreed. They stood there for a moment longer, just looking at each other. It was a silent understanding, an unspoken agreement that this wasn't just some fleeting connection. They both felt it, this strange pull between them that neither could explain, but both could feel deep in their bones. Then, as if by some silent agreement, they both took a step back, each of them slightly reluctant to leave, but knowing the time had come. Alex was the first to break the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can I call you?" he said, his words filled with both certainty and hope. Lily nodded, her lips curling into a soft smile. "I'll be waiting." With that, Alex turned to leave, his footsteps slow but deliberate, as if he was savoring every moment of this new chapter in his life. Lily watched him go, her heart still pounding in her chest. As he reached the door, he turned back for a brief moment, their eyes meeting across the room one last time. The look they shared was electric, charged with everything they hadn't said, everything that was still unsaid, but everything they both knew. The door swung shut behind him, and Lily let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. That night, as Lily lay in bed, she couldn't help but replay the events of the day in her mind. It had been a whirlwind, a series of surprising moments that she hadn't seen coming. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something real, something beautiful. She thought about the way Alex had looked at her, the way he had spoken to her, the way he had made her feel like she mattered. She thought about how easily they had connected, how effortlessly the conversation had flowed. It wasn't just a date. It wasn't just a chance meeting. It was something more. She didn't know how or why, but she was certain of one thing. She couldn't stop thinking about him. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through her window, Lily woke up with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. The world outside seemed a little brighter, a little more full of possibilities. It wasn't perfect, but for the first time in a while, she felt like it was okay to hope. Across town, in a luxurious penthouse filled with sleek furniture and expensive art, Alex sat by the window, his phone in his hand. His fingers hovered over the screen, and with a steady breath, he pressed call. The phone rang, and his heart raced. On the other end, Lily's voice came through, soft and clear. "Hello?" A smile tugged at Alex's lips. "Hey, it's me. I was just thinking about you." Lily's heart skipped a beat as she heard his voice. "I was thinking about you too." And in that moment, the distance between them, the barriers of their worlds, all seemed to fade away. They didn't need to know what would happen next. They didn't need to know how it would work, or if they would face obstacles. They didn't need to have all the answers. They only knew one thing. They were falling for each other, and they didn't want to let go. Their story had only just begun. Outro. Love blossoms when we open our hearts, and I'm so thankful you've joined me on this journey. For another beautiful tale of unexpected connections, click the video to the left. If you believe in these stories, hit subscribe to spread the magic of love and hope. See you in the next one.